This is an SM Media production.
Hi folks, and welcome to the latest episode of the Celtic Report right here on SM Media. I'm Scott Pike. It's always a pleasure to be your host, and I'm delighted this week to be joined by, welcome back to the show, Michael Shearer.
It's good to be back, Scott.
Always a pleasure, mate. It's a funny old week. It's international week. We don't have many Celtic games to cover, but we're going to open the floor up. We've got some questions to came in. We've got a few kind of different subjects to talk about, so it'll be quite fascinating. But before we get into the questions, to be sitting at this stage in November, all the kind of big home away games, been to Ibrox, been to Pittodrie, been to Tynecastle, and won, to be sitting in the position Celtic are in, I would say is a fairly positive one.
I think it's been really good. There's been some frustrating results at home, I guess, but when you just look at the away results, it's probably the hardest start to a season that I can imagine any Scottish Premiership teams faced. Yeah, I don't think there's anything in memory that anyone can think of that's comparable. And it just shows how good a manager Brendan Rodgers is. He's managed to walk into this situation with a team built by Ange Postecoglou, get those victories, even at Ibrox against the wall. William Scales in defence, Lager Bielka, he was still able to do it. How many managers could come into Celtic and do it under that pressure? But it's just the person he is.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think to have that run and be in the position Celtic are in, I think is massive as well. And I think Aberdeen, the game before the international break, it was fairly comfortable, wasn't it? Like it was the result. I think was a bit. Look, I don't think we saw 6-0 coming at 3-0, but I think that just goes to show. I think that team were on a mission after the disappointment in the European game during the week to get the 6 goals, and it can just make a difference when you get into the colossal run of games Celtic are going to have between now and New Year. It's going to be, I think it's going to be constant, isn't it? It's going to be one every 3 days. So to have that kind of build up for players like Yang to get on the score sheet, it can just work wonders for them between now and New Year.
I think Kyogo's injury in that game really spurred them on. There was quite a lot of
Yeah, I saw that as
animosity
well.
at the game. I was at the game and support were very frustrated, and that added to Celtic wanting to get those goals. There was no mercy from Celtic. They were looking for 6, maybe even 7, and all coming off the bench. He had something to prove, even though he scored against St Mirren in recent weeks, but he wanted to get more goals. He wants to get in the fold, and everyone was just almost at the top of their game against Aberdeen, and Aberdeen just set up to defend, and it just played into Celtic's hands. But I think Celtic deserve the credit for winning 6-0 against Aberdeen. I don't see many teams beating Aberdeen 6-0 this season.
No, not at all. I think they were coming off a ridiculous a hard game in Europe as well, so their legs kind of went. But to put that team to the sword, I think is a massive statement. But we'll move into some questions. We did put the word out for some questions. We got a fair few in, so let's start. We're recording this on Monday night, so the Scotland game was the night before. Does the performance of Greg Taylor last night in the Scotland-Norway game emphasise the need for a better level of left back?
I don't think that one game emphasises the need, but watching Celtic maybe over the past 2 years, you would know that if they want to improve as a side, Greg Taylor is one of the weaknesses in the team. In that position, Celtic had Kieran Tierney years ago. He was at the top of his game, one of the best left backs we've seen in Scotland. Obviously, there's always going to be comparisons. I think Greg Taylor has done the most with the skill set he's had. Postecoglou took him to another level last season and the season before, but they do need to progress in that side, because when you look at someone like Alistair Johnston and Greg Taylor and you compare them, Johnston is a better player than Greg Taylor. He's more all round. Greg Taylor's pace is always a big issue in Europe. He always gets caught in the counter attacks. Wingers, and when you watch teams in Europe, they always attack Greg Taylor. They don't attack Alistair Johnston. They've obviously assessed that as the weakness. And even with Liam Scales there, they tried to attack him, but they weren't getting as much success as well with Greg Taylor. You look at the game against Atletico Madrid, he's caught in two minds while it track Griezmann, and that leads to Morata's goal. It's poor defending there. And for Scotland against Georgia, he mishits the ball and it goes past him, and Georgia get a goal from that. So he can be culpable defensively, and you wouldn't say he's the most attacking fullback out there. So he's pretty mediocre at both at times. He does have the occasional game where he's outstanding and gets goals, but it's very rarely seen at Celtic.
I think the thing with me is that clearly, for one reason or another, Rodgers doesn't trust Bernabe. So
I think he's let him
isn't,
down so many times, even in
yeah.
the background, that we
So
don't
like
know about.
with like Johnson, for example, like he has been obviously kind of fit and unfit over the course of his spell, but he'll have no issue throwing Ralston in. And although Ralston isn't the same level as Johnson, we know that, but I don't think he's got that in the terms of the other side. Like he doesn't have the trust in Bernabe to go if Taylor's maybe having a bad run. Like we saw at the start of the season, I thought even maybe Aberdeen away in the Kilmarnock game where they were out of the cup, I thought there was a real time he was really exposed, and I thought maybe a run out the side will do him no harm, but he just doesn't have the trust in Bernabe. So that makes you think, is that a position he needs to cover? But it's been the same for a while. It's even like with Tierney going, you would have thought when Tierney left, you would think that was a lot of money coming in. It was like, do you go and get a big name kind of left back? And he tried that, obviously with kind of Bernabe, and it didn't work. It hasn't worked to me until Bernabe comes in and has a massive run and looks amazing and keeps himself out of trouble. He's never going to have that level of trust. And the thing that worries me with Taylor is that he's fairly predictable. And I don't. I think even in Europe, we saw, you mentioned there about Atletico Madrid. We saw on last night, he was exposed pretty badly, but it was also not. I don't think he was helped with the fact that the defence was completely different. It wasn't a natural. Like McKenna was saying, Scott McKenna is not the right guy to be in that position for me. So I think there was obviously talk in the summer about the boy from, was it Non? He was mentioned as well. So he clearly has that idea, but it's how much do these guys cost? Alistair Johnsons don't come about very often. You don't get a player for that price.
I think something that's key as well is when you watch Celtic, it was Dyson Maeda was having to play off the left hand side to maybe cover for deficiencies. Brendan Rodgers isn't going to do that. Brendan Rodgers shifted Dyson Maeda at the right hand side for this season. He's no thinking about things like that, like Ange was. We'll cover Taylor. Rodgers just wants to build a team, and he's not looking for any passengers. And it's became clear, even with Palma. I think Palma has a great work rate, winning the ball back, but he's no Dyson Maeda when it comes to winning the ball back, and that makes Taylor even more exposed. And Rodgers even tried to shift Taylor to be like an overlapping fullback earlier in the season, but he's reverted back to putting him in an inverted position just to cover for his deficiencies. I don't think Rodgers really wants to have too many players that he has to do that with at Celtic. He wouldn't expect that.
Yeah, no, I think it's a position that Celtic really need to look at, and I think he's serviceable, Greg Taylor. Like I think similar to the goalkeeping position, I think he's fine for a certain time. You want to go, like we'll touch in Europe later on, because that's a kind of big subject that I think a few people want to address, is that to go to that next level, you need to invest. You need to go for that better level of play, and I don't think Greg Taylor's there. But I think he's serviceable enough. And next question, if Matt O'Reilly was to go in January, how much could Celtic spend on a replacement? Before we get into talking about spending money on a replacement, do you think Matt O'Reilly could go?
I don't think he'll go in January. I think it would be very tough for Celtic to sell in January. Historically speaking, I can't remember too many players that have left in January. There was Frimpong, but Celtic were out of the title race that season by that point. But historically speaking, Celtic don't sell players in January that are part of the starting 11. He might go in the summer, but it's interesting to see that a player that just signed a new contract so recently has been linked to so many teams. It's flattering for Celtic, obviously, but to sell O'Reilly and replace him, he's almost irreplaceable. He's such an all-round player. When I think of him, his defensive work rate is something I think that goes unheralded. I know he's been able to add goals this season, but he's just such an all-round midfielder. And with Nori Hotati, he's recovered. He's replaced him well in the starting 11. And Celtic would miss him deeply, and it would affect Celtic in the second half of the season. You would give Rangers a bit of an edge if they lost Matt O'Reilly, because he's been so crucial to Celtic getting goals when they needed them this season. He's almost covered for a lot of bad performances with late goals or goals to start the game.
What do you think? Like, I don't think he'll go in January, but I do think there will be interest. I do think there is concrete interest from England and other clubs. Price wise, I mean, it's something that's the great unknown. What do you sell for? But with O'Reilly, because he's so talented and has kicked on. I think he's kicked on leaps and bounds even from last year. Like just that level, he's just went up another gear. What is the figure you can look at? Like, is 20 bare minimum? Like, because you would get that, I think.
It's trying to think, isn't it? Because I seen that there was a bid for Abada, it got rejected for 7 million. You think Abada and his talents, teams are trying to bid something like that. Then you think of Jota, that's at the other end of the spectrum, who they overpaid for maybe at 25 million. So you maybe talk about somewhere between 15 and 25, somewhere in that ballpark. But then you've got to think about Celtic. How do they recruit somebody that's going to be able to go into the team and do something like what he's doing in the side? It's so difficult. Even with Paulo Bernardo, he's been brought in.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't look at the level for Celtic. They're maybe struggling to not replace, but upgrade players in the midfield. It's so difficult. Even with McGregor, Celtic have signed so many defensive midfielders, failed to bring anybody in to play alongside them. O'Reilly plays in a more advanced role. Who do they have? Even domestically speaking, you can maybe look at somebody like Lennon Miller, they've been linked with, but there's no concrete rumours to say that Celtic have had anything and he's signed a new contract. Hatate's got to come back in. So Celtic would be in such a difficult position if they were to sell O'Reilly in January. So I don't see that happening. And in the summer, they maybe could, but they would need time to work in recruiting somebody new in that position.
I think with Matt O'Reilly, because Hatate's injury, and as you say, I think Bernardo's been solid. I don't think he's been like he's not jumped out the way like O'Reilly did when he came in, for example. But like it's going to be such a difficult run of games. Like as say, just kind of looking here, he played 50 games for MK Dons and Celtic before obviously he came in January. He's played 50 games last season. He's already played 13 this season. So you're expecting him to get.
You're pointing at is just incredible, isn't it?
Yeah, like he's pretty much like, do you know what I mean? He's 22 and I think he's played something like 150 games. But that's fairly, do you know what I mean? That's you won't see that very often for a player like that. And obviously he's beginning to kind of get recognised for kind of Denmark and things like that. Like he's fairly like efficient, but it's that thing of if you bring somebody in, like could we even? I think that was the thing with Ange as well. If a player was getting sold, his replacement was already there. I mean, for example, Johnson's in before Juranovic leaves, O's in before Giakoumakis leaves. So that's something that Celtic might, as home, somebody who can change, who can come in. And I don't think Home's anywhere near the same, not the same level of player, because I think Home could get to that level, but he's not the same type of player as O'Reilly.
So best way to compare it, is he at the same level when O'Reilly joins Celtic?
Exactly.
That's the best way to compare it.
I think they're the same age, aren't they? I think they're the same age roughly when, because Home I think's 20 and O'Reilly was 20 when he joined, so it's fair enough. Turnbull, I don't think you're getting the same level of fitness out of Turnbull as you would like as O'Reilly.
He does have a poor injury record, you're right.
Yeah, and I don't think has he completed 90 minutes since he come back from injury.
No, Turnbull very rarely completes 90 minutes. He usually goes off.
So it's a tough position to fill, and obviously it's something Celtic will look at. But in terms of if you say, let's for example, they get 20 million for O'Reilly, how much of that will Rodgers be given to spend in a replacement? Because it's a tough position. It's a really tough position to get a player of that calibre without breaking the bank.
Even the players that they have signed, they haven't broke the bank for them. You haven't broke the bank for O'Reilly. You haven't broke the bank for Hatate. It's been intelligent recruitment, and that does frustrate Celtic fans at times, but also pays dividends. You even look at Palmer; they didn't pay too much for him.
Yeah,
Celtic will continue to use that model. So they're not going to sign somebody for even 10 million. You get 20 million for O'Reilly. They won't sign a £10 million midfielder. It's just that simple. So it's just about the recruitment department finding somebody who has that talent.
Yeah, absolutely. But well, as well, the thing that doesn't really get mentioned, Matt O'Reilly wasn't first choice that summer. It was a boy, it was an Australian boy. What was his name? Was it McGree? He was the one they wanted before, and obviously he went to Middlesbrough. So it's probably Ange's sitting going, that was a blessing, because I don't think he's kicked on at all, McGree, when at Middlesbrough. I think is he still at Middlesbrough?
I think so. In Middlesbrough, I done a lot about tongue in cheek about. I think it was about the green jersey or something, and his tweet. So Middlesbrough really seen it as a coup at the time, but Celtic ended up getting O'Reilly, and they haven't looked back since. I don't even think Celtic fans mentioned McGree until we're talking about it now.
I think it's one of those we'll look back in a few years and go, that could be a massive blessing. But next question, this is a fascinating one. Who should be Celtic's regular penalty taker? It's the question I think Brendan Rodgers thinks.
Yeah. I think the way he took the penalty and the keeper went in the right direction. And a good penalty taker is able to even lift it up past the goalkeeper, even when he dives the right way. And Palmer was able to do that. He showed such confidence in that game. He's such a confident player. And when it comes to penalty takers, even McGregor's shown that he isn't great taking penalties. Hatate's shown he doesn't have that confidence. I think it's just about that confidence and passion to take the penalty. Palmer was so desperate to take the penalty and show everyone that he can become Celtic's penalty taker. Under the circumstances, the game was 2-0, okay, but there was quite a lot of frustration around the stadium when Palmer turned that. To go from 2-0 about, I think it was around 79 minutes into the game, he scores a penalty and they win 6-0. He plays a large part in that by stepping up and taking that penalty. O was the one that was fouled for the penalty and he didn't even take the penalty.
Yeah, I think that it's the same with Kyogo as well. Like, Kyogo's one that's fascinating me. I know, like I've always, well, obviously, like the other side, the City Tavernier takes the penalty, but it's captain. That's a kind of captain thing. You don't see McGregor really doing it. You don't, like, do you know what I mean? Like Kyogo's someone like, and I think it's more impressive last season. He got the goal level he did, and it didn't. Mm-hmm. I don't think he got a penalty to begin with, but like Turnbull was taking them at the start of the season. He obviously missed the one against St Mirren. Hatate missed against Hearts. So Palmer, to me, I think, but I think it's as you say. I didn't really notice that until you brought it up. He was desperate to take the penalty, and I think it leads into this kind of level of confidence that he has. But it's certainly an issue that Celtic will need. I hope Palmer can solve.
It's been ongoing for years, even with Juranovic, who was known for taking penalties. I still remember him missing a penalty for Celtic. So there's never been someone who's just been the consistent penalty taker for years. Whereas across
remember
the
Giacomakis missing one against, was it Livingston?
Yeah, and it was late in the game as well.
Yeah.
He obviously seen himself as the confident player who could take penalties when it mattered most. I think most Celtic fans will just see it like that. Anytime you imagine Celtic having a penalty taker, there's always that seed of doubt in your mind that they could miss the penalty. And you make the right comparison with Tavernier across the city, which is interesting because at one point Tavernier in his first season wasn't even the penalty taker. I think it was Kenny Miller, so he worked his way. So it just shows you that sometimes there is someone in the team who has that penalty ability but doesn't step up right away. So with Palmer, maybe that's happened. And he was known for taking set pieces, not penalties, corners and free kicks. So they've obviously seen his technique and assessed that he is the person to take a penalty. And when you think about it, the goals he scores for such distance, if he can score them for there with that technique, and I think something that's interesting is Harry Kewell. I think Harry Kewell would be the person to work with Palmer on taking set pieces.
Yeah.
He works with the attacking players at Celtic, so Harry Kewell will be the one to navigate them how to take penalties better than they have been over the past couple of seasons.
There was only the only player last season. Celtic, I think, get 9 penalties. Just looking here, get 9 penalties in all competitions last season. The only player to score all of his was.
Trying to think.
Midfielder, not there now.
Aaron Moy.
I didn't. But
was that the penalty against Hibs? I remember him taking
scored a penalty against Hibs, scores a penalty against Dundee United, and then scores a penalty against Morton in the Cup. So he was, but he's took penalties all his career. So he's the sort of player like, do you know what I mean? Like he's not there's not a player there now like him who will like have took
that
penalties.
Experience.
Yeah,
most important thing, isn't it?
Yeah, so I think Palmer could be the answer to that solution. Next question: have you been impressed with Odin Holm, and do you think he can be a regular starter?
I think he's been okay, but like it's kind of similar to O'Reilly in some ways. He needs to add maybe more goals to his game, like O'Reilly has this season. But even creatively, Holm needs to work on that as well. He came on against St Mirren and got the assist for O late in the game, but that was against tired legs. He needs to work on maybe breaking the lines when you're against an opposition who sat deep. Even when they beat Aberdeen 6-0, he wasn't really involved in creating chances and putting balls in the box and behind the defence. So that's something in his game he needs to work on. I think defensively, I've been impressed with how physical he is. So maybe he's the sort of midfielder you need in a deeper role, but he's not going to play as a holding midfielder. So Then he needs to work on his game, getting more goals, particularly. He looks to be a physical player who's good aerially as well, but I definitely feel like in his game, he needs to work on getting more goals and more assists. Because see, at Celtic, you need to do that. Celtic need to win games, and that's the most important thing. They need to be able to rely on a midfielder who hasn't scored for a couple of games but can just score out of nowhere. And I don't really see that with Home yet.
I think the most fascinating thing after Rodgers' press conference last week was what he said about Odin Home. He was honest as you can get. He obviously said about he threw him in. He's gifted. He is gifted. We can see that, but physically, as you say, he's not there yet, and that obviously comes with kind of playing more games and things like that. But it's his mentality. I think he's more like, I think there's times where on the touchline he'll see Home like there's a more dangerous ball as an option, but he will just play it safe. And that he's still, do you know what I mean? He's still only 20. I don't even think he's 21 yet. That is the sort of thing that comes. But I think that's actually something Brendan Rodgers is really good at. Is like there's players who hide under that level of honesty.
Wouldn't have said that about O'Reilly before the season, would you? That you've
No.
scored this many goals.
No.
And it's not a coincidence that Rodgers has come in and he scored those goals. But I think with Rodgers is sometimes he's harsh on players in the media, but he does it on purpose. Rodgers is a very psychological manager who understands football as human beings. And with Holmes' comments, he's highlighting them. He's making Holmes know that he's thinking about him and he wants him to become a better player and get into the first team. And I think Holmes sort of like, when I imagine him, he's kind of like the opposite of David Turnbull in many ways. David Turnbull gets a lot of goals and assists and maybe doesn't impress, but Home impresses with some aspects of the game and he's passing and he's dribbling, but he doesn't get those goals and assists.
Next question. Can we expect to see Marco Tilio get a run in the next few weeks? We got this question just before. There's a bit of chat going about that Tilio could be going out and loan. I think he came on for the under-23 Olympic squad for Australia. So certainly obviously getting game time, but you will. I don't think you'll see that him being thrown straight in. I think you'll maybe see a couple of kind of B team appearances behind closed doors before you maybe even a loan spell. I think he's a long-term prospect. I don't think he's a player you'll see getting thrown straight in, even though there's injuries there.
I think the one thing that might affect that is I've heard rumours about Luis Palma. I don't know like his condition is. He's picked up a knock against Mexico, so he might be forced in. And there's uncertainty over whether Palma's going to play against Mexico. It's on Wednesday morning. So if Palma doesn't play that game or isn't involved in that game, then that maybe opens the door for Tilio. And before today, I would have thought there's not much chance of Tilio getting an opportunity. But with Palma injured, you've got to look at Tilio. I know Mikey Johnson was given a little bit of time against Hibernian, but he's not been in the squad since then. So Marco Tilio should be given the opportunity, I think. The only thing I will say about him is he's not the most physically imposing player. And I know people say that about Kyogo at times, but that certainly will be an aspect of his game he might need to work on, because if he's not been put in the first team yet, that's something that could have been assessed. He's obviously got all the talent in the world when it comes to his trickery. And he looked like a very creative winger who could score goals and get assists when he was in the A-League, and he was impressive. He won 3 titles there. So he's played in a team who dominate the league, and that's why he's maybe been signed for Celtic. He's used to playing that style of football where you're expected to win games, but it's been a poor start because he's had the injury that he apparently was carrying at Melbourne City, and then to join Celtic, and I think the injuries hampered him, because if it didn't, he would have played for the Australian under-23s starting the game. But he only came on for the last around 9 minutes for them. So I think that shows that injury was quite a severe injury that he suffered, even though at the time it was expected that he'd only be out for a couple of weeks.
He's been a player that's interesting because when he was first getting mentioned, obviously with Celtic there was a knock, we were told, but now it's November and we've not seen sight or sound of him, but he does look to me to be a player who will thrive. But you obviously need that it's a difficult time to come in, as you say. Look, it seems to be his camp that's making the loan chat, which suggests to me that he's putting himself in the shop window, which...
Yeah, definitely. I read that when I was reading the stories about him, and it wasn't anything that Celtic had said.
No.
It was from his camp that had said that. It shows that there's frustration, but at the same time, when Celtic do possess a lot of wingers, and they have signed them to be in the first team, but you have to prove that you're up to the standard. And Brendan Rodgers isn't going to take any passengers, as I said earlier.
No.
When you think of Palmer, Yang, and Tillio, they're all quite comparable, and they're young wingers who'd played a lot of minutes in good leagues and were involved in a lot of goals and assists. But Tillio's no match the standard of the other two. Even Yang looks to be first choice over Tillio on that right hand side, because Tillio would play on the right hand side.
Yeah.
And it just shows you that Yang must be showing more in training than Tillio has. And I think that injury must have hampered him and his confidence. And to be seeing him talking about potentially going away on loan, it's quite disappointing, because I understand Mickey Johnson saying that the situation he's been at Celtic, he's been there years and he's been frustrated with injuries and that. But with Tillio saying that, it's very disappointing to just see a player who's only joined Celtic a couple of months ago already talking about wanting to go out on loan so fast.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I think it's one of those, like, he's going to be, because of obviously, like, he's 22. I think he's had 7 caps for Australia. He'll get a decent, like, club that side. I think that'll be where he would go on loan. I don't see him going to, like, an English, like, or even like something like a Hibs. I don't see him going that direction. I think he will head kind of where he was to go on a loan spell. But I just think right now, this could, if Palmer's injured, he could get a chance, but I think it'll be tough. I think he's a long-term player. And Celtic have been able to do that in the past few years. Like, they've sent a lot of players out on loan and they've came back even after injury. Like, Ryan Christie's obviously the one. Like, he came back such a different player, there was a gear just he went up.
Mm-hmm.
You would be hoping something like that for Tillio, but I think right now, I mean, it's going to be interesting if Palmer isn't fit. Could he just get thrown in? But I think that's something to keep an eye on. But
The only
I think
question I would have is, the only question I would have is, when it comes to the physicality aspect, if he does go back to Australia, he's not going to improve really physically because he's already played there. So the question is, where does Celtic loan a winger out to? It's understandable to loan a defender to a Scottish team, but when it comes to a winger, because they've got to play in a certain style of play, a team that dominate the league. It's such a tough task to loan Tillio out somewhere. Like, is he maybe better being around the first team setup? You hear Guardiola done that with a player like Foden, because realistically, when a player goes to the Championship, they might play a more defensive system and it affects their game maybe negatively.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, like, you looking at some of the teams that have been mentioned, like, this is no, like, they've been interested, but I don't see them going to, like, there's been clubs like Sunderland and Swansea mentioned as potential destinations. I don't see that happening. I don't see him going to a club like that. I think it's more he'll go to the A-League, he'll go to whether it's another club in Asia, I don't know. But I just don't see him going to. But I think of that as a thing. Like, he doesn't look the most physical. I mean, I think he's only 5'7". I think that will be something similar to home that he'll need to sharpen up on. But again, that'll be another interesting thing.
It was similar with Rogic as well.
Exactly.
When Rogic joined Celtic, I think it was a season or two before he was really in the first team setup. And it's easy to make a comparison with Aaron Moy, but Aaron Moy didn't join directly from the A-League. Rogic did, and so it's easier to compare those two, because there's a big adaptation to moving to Britain and playing in Scottish football from the A-League.
Yeah, and people will say obviously about Celtic's record with the signings for Japan. Those guys were going to succeed because of their talent. Like, Kyogo was going to succeed. Hatate is just a magnificent ball player. Maeda's got the work rate, but there's a few that haven't worked, like Ideguchi, Kobayashi. What's been their issue? Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Kobayashi's I don't think suited to Scottish football because of the kind of the physical aspect of it. Ideguchi, I don't think we've seen enough, but he isn't Hatate, he isn't Maeda. So it is a different. You need to be a certain level to come to this side of the world.
Attitude's the most important thing.
Yeah,
I always think the attitude breathes over everything else. You can have all the talent in the world, but as you're making the right comparison, you talk about 3 or 4 Celtic players for the Japan have made the grade, and then 2 or 3 haven't. I think it's just the attitude over anything else. You can have all the talent in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question. Fully fit right now, who partners Cameron Carter-Vickers, Liam Scales, Navrojki or Lager Bielka? I think right now that's an easy question.
It's an easy question. Even, I can be harsh here, even with Naroki, I was at the Ross County game at the beginning of the season. He was caught out for Ross County's goal in the second half. So, and with Scales, I watch Scales so week in, week out, and I can't pick many faults in his game. And even looking deeper into data, when it comes to his recoveries. He's usually the highest in the game, but both teams, even though Celtic dominate possession, getting the ball into the opposition's half, he's usually really effective in doing that. His role of playing as a left back at times, and he's earlier in his career, and as the third centre back off the left hand side in a back five, has just made him so good in progressing the ball. The fact he's left footed helps Celtic get the ball out the back much easier. I know Carol Starfelt done better the longer he was at Celtic, but it just looked more assured with Scales. I think Scales has just been such an incredible player, and we've talked to him getting a new contract. I think that'll be wrapped up in the next month or so. He looks incredible. I remember watching him one game I was at. It was against Dundee United. Celtic won 1-0. He scored late in the game, but Scales started the game at left back, and Forrest was playing off the left hand side, and Scales gets substituted at half time.
Yeah,
because his performance was so poor. He's just had such an amazing turnaround for Celtic. Even when he was given opportunities before, he didn't look comfortable in the left back position. It's just been genius to move him into centre back, and I think a lot of credit goes to Aberdeen for playing him in that position last season, and then he's came to Celtic and that is his position. Because I think Celtic maybe utilised him wrong at the beginning, and Aberdeen looked out and seen that he would be better as a centre back. And I think it's quite comparable to make the comparison between a centre back and a back five who plays as a left centre back and a centre back for Celtic, and how to defend the 1v1 positions when they're attacked. Because when teams counter attack Celtic, Scales will find himself in similar positions to what he did at Aberdeen.
See the thing as well, I watched the Ireland against the Holland game on Saturday night, and he was so comfortable. We played in a back three, and Xavi Simons and Dumfries, do you know what I mean? Two really hard-working, right-sided players. And he wasn't really, do you know what I mean? He was fairly solid. And it's been that, like, obviously the Rangers game, he was outstanding. He was the best player on the park, but he's not, I can't think, even Atletico Madrid, when it was a bit of a doing, I wasn't thinking at times, Scales was at fault there. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, he's not, he's been very, very solid. And I was quite taken with Navrojki actually when he came in. Same with like Lagerbielke, I think is a player who kind of struggle to adapt, and obviously injuries haven't helped him. Navrojki, I think he is a talented ball player, but Scales right now is he's so dependable. And do you know what I mean? And it's that example I keep saying about Brendan Rodgers. He has a player who he'll see a player who he'll look at and go, I can get so much better out of him. And it can only be like a small thing he'll change. As you say, he's far more comfortable playing at the kind of left-hand side. But what as well as he's left-footed. Do you know what I mean? Celtic don't have another left-footed player. And that, I think that's something that Carter Vickers has benefited from as well in recent weeks. Having a player there who's not in his way, if that makes sense. Like, I think him and Stark felt that was their big issue. They were both right-footed. They were both wanting to kind of go to one side. Whereas Scales is, do you know what I mean? He's very happy to
you know
play
who I think deserves a lot of credit in this? John Kennedy. He works with the defenders in training, and he coached them. I was at the game earlier in the season against St Johnstone at Celtic Park. It was 0-0 at finished, and Scales was criticised a lot in that game for fans for not knowing what to do when he got the ball, like who to pass the ball to, when to dribble, when to drive. So that's been worked on greatly, and the credit must go to Scales himself and John Kennedy, because they two have clearly worked on that together, made him a far greater player when it comes to knowing when to break the lines for Celtic, when to drive for the ball. It's just incredible, because he just looked so lost against St Johnstone in that game. He just didn't look comfortable. And I think people were harsh to judge him in that game because he'd just been put right in the side due to injuries. When I just look at him now, I think of that game and compare it with what I see now, that's not the same player. And that's only been a couple of months. It's just incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question. Is Lewis Palmer looking a steal at $3.5 million? He's hit the ground running, isn't he? Like, he's the thing as well is that I think the big difference, and I've said this, between him and Yang, and I think Yang's been fine. I think obviously his final ball was something that he needs to work on, but I thought he improved massively against Aberdeen. But Palmer's got the bravery and the confidence to use his final ball a lot better, and that's what I think kind of separates him and puts him. I think he's a real find.
Two things stood out for me against Aberdeen. His work rate off the ball, he loses the ball quite a lot. He lost it less against Aberdeen, but seeing he loses the ball, he wins the ball back very quickly. He's very aggressive in how he wins the ball back. I think a lot of people don't notice that when they watch him, but I do. And the other thing that's obviously clearly evident against Aberdeen, his ability to go down the outside on the wing. Brendan Rodgers spoke about that after the game, working on that in training. That's something that Harry Keel's worked on with him in training. Being able to put balls in the pitch, you've got to be able to do that. So, that feeds into his game, and that goal, the outside of the boot cross into was just exceptional. He was absolutely outstanding. That's got to be one of the highest standards I've seen a player play at Celtic Park.
Yeah.
And that's some criticism, that's some praise coming from a player. Palma, who joined Celtic this season. And I know he said he's had a great start to life, but there was times that it was frustrating for him at the beginning, for maybe a month, just over a month, where he didn't look up to the level, and everybody was comparing him to Jota. But he's a different player for Jota, and he's shown that he's bringing something new to the Celtic team that he didn't have last season.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. I think he's been terrific, and I think I'm kind of hoping he's not as injured as I hope the injury isn't bad. I think he'll
Quite
be a massive
uncertain
blow.
what's happening with that. I've tried to look into it, but I can't break any news whether he's going to play or what. But he took a knock from the Mexico right back.
I think he scored as well, didn't he?
He assisted the first goal.
Yeah.
And he got man of the match as well. So he's had back-to-back man of the matches.
No, he's done himself no harm since coming into Celtic. Next question: with links to a striker hotting up, is that a number one priority for Brendan Rodgers in January?
He said that.
I think the problem with that is that I think O is fine. I think he's a more than valuable number two, but he's not Kyogo. And that I think is the big difference. As there are many strikers like Kyogo, but it clearly doesn't. And that's a problem a lot of managers have when they lose their talisman as such. If Kyogo's injured for a period of time, it doesn't have the same confidence in O. And that'll always be a concern to a manager.
So I think this is all to do with the Asian Cup. The Asian Cup will
That
run
as well.
from January into February. So that's hotted up the rumours. And Rodgers has admitted he said they will be looking for a striker. That's the number one priority. I think it's looking to maybe be a loan. And I've read today that Celtic have inquired about Sidney van Hooijdonk from Bologna. And he looks to be moving out of the club on loan or permanently, with Thiago Motta looking for a new striker. So Van Hooijdonk, the son of Pierre Van Hooijdonk, I think a lot of people have known because he was linked with Celtic in the summer. His situation's changed completely at Bologna. He was on loan last season in the Eredivisie. He scored 16 goals and he was given a chance at Bologna this season, but it's just not worked out. He's only made around 5 appearances for them in Serie A, so he's clearly not making the grade there. And I think a change of scenery at Celtic, that rumour looks to seriously be hotting up. They were linked to Lawrence Shankland, but
I was going to ask you about him. I don't think that would be one that would. I don't think he would be a Celtic player. I think that would be I'd be surprised if that was their option. I think, like, when you look at, as you said there about a loan, I think Shankland, how much our heart's going to be looking for him. Do you know what I mean?
I know, a premium.
Yeah, and as mentioned, like, I think Van Hooijdonk, like, remember how many years of Celtic been linked with Jordan Larson? I think there's always going to be a link there because of his name. Is he going to be that level, or is it a kind of romance thing? But there are strikers there. Do you know what I mean? You can pick up strikers for 2 or 3 million. I think the Asian Cup thing is going to be. I think that's
a big problem. You can't make excuses. Like, I think Celtic might fall into the trap sometimes that, we're missing all these players, but you've got to be able to deal with that.
Yeah.
Players play at the Euros in the summer and maybe they come back with an injury or something, and that happens. And it's the same way the Asian Cup in January. That's just when the tournament is, and that's when it's always been. And that's not going to change. And you know the risk signing players from Asia if they want to play in the Asian Cup.
Yeah. And it's not like, for example, when he was trying Maeda through the middle in the summer, you think, you could put Maeda there. He's going to be away as well, probably. So
he'll be back for injury by then.
So it's going to be a massive problem.
You're missing those 3 up front, Maeda, O, and Kyogo, so there almost certainly will be a striker signed.
Yeah.
And the 2 that's been linked has only been Van Hooijdonk and Shankland, but as I was going to say, between the 2 of them, there's a age difference of 5 years. Celtic, how often do Celtic sign 28-year-olds? They signed Yakimakis and Janovic when they were maybe a wee bit older than usual, but that was because Celtic were in a crisis, signed 2 ready-made players. So when it comes to a striker, I think it might be a loan with an option to buy, though, because Celtic don't really like getting players on loan, with the exception of Phillips, who they signed through an emergency. But if they're going to get someone, it might be somebody on loan with an option to buy to see how they do at Celtic and
Mhm.
adapt, because it's going to be a difficult month, January. I know December's always looked at as a difficult month, but January looks to be just as difficult now.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question. Is there any players out of the B team scene that could move into the first team? Probably Rocco Vata is probably the one you would say he's doing it at the B team level, but you obviously covered the last in the last article we did here, but I just don't think there's anybody close to them at the moment to breaking that, to getting into that level. I just don't.
What with Celtic is they usually just loan them to a higher level straight
Mhm.
away if they
Yeah.
deem them worthy enough. When you look at McPherson and other players who have just been loaned up to higher levels, him in the Championship with Queen's Park, players
Mhm.
have just they've been moved up to a higher level as soon as they're identified. With the exception of Vata, though, that's what makes it so interesting at his age.
Yeah.
You would think that Celtic would have thought about potentially loaning him somewhere, but that seems to be quite a difficult situation with Vata ongoing, and there doesn't look to be any signs of a contract being agreed.
No.
So he might depart in January for a compensation fee, or in the summer for even a even smaller compensation fee. So when you look at the B team, there is promising players that were obviously there to make the grades. But I think the deeper question of the B team will be, in the next 10 years, how many Celtic players will come through the B team and then work into the first team?
That's what I've
That's the
said.
best way to.
That's been my argument about it since it was introduced to the Lowland League. How many of them are going to move up? And I've off the top of my head, for the three teams, I think there's maybe two or three. Like I think off the top of my head, I think it's an argument that is seriously valid.
There's no many arguments for it. There's some arguments against it, obviously. But when you look at players like Ben Doak that have left Celtic in recent years,
Yeah.
that's the biggest problem with these young players, that they're getting recruited a lot younger than they used to. And European giants like Liverpool, Bayern Munich are able to buy these players for only a couple of 100,000, or maybe even $1 million at the most. And that's putting Celtic in a real position. I think you even look across the city with McCausland. There's already rumours of McCausland going to Brentford. So that just says a lot about the way football is right now. Players will even just want to move down to England to live the lifestyle. And I'm not even meaning just by the finances. I think even these youth academies and the facilities they have in England, even Germany, it's the culture that they seem to want. And I think agents are just looking at players even younger and think we can get them away from Celtic quicker. Even Ben Doak, Celtic tried their hardest to get Ben Doak to sign with the club over a longer deal. He was brought on against Dundee United and Rangers in February, and by March he was already away to Liverpool. That's incredible. That Postecoglou, I think, even tried his best himself to make Ben Doak stay at the club, and he was away. So that's just a damning indictment of the way it is.
Yeah,
the youth setup.
I think that's totally valid as well. Final kind of few questions. How out of 10, how would you assess Brendan Rodgers' return so far? I think we mentioned that at the start. It'd probably be, apart from the cup,
I'd say an 8, maybe.
Probably an 8.
I think a 7's too harsh. 9's too.
Yeah, the cup in
too
Europe,
high.
I think it's the only kind of feathers in the cap, but I think everyone else has been pretty solid.
Yeah, even with Europe, I'm not the most frustrated. I do see progress. I know it seems to be Celtic fans are always saying they see progress every season, but actually getting through to Europe after Christmas in the Champions League. But I see progress. Kilmarnock, I think there was a lot ongoing there with Haksabanovic in the background. He was eager to move away from Celtic, and when they lost to Kilmarnock, there was a player off injured on the pitch. So yeah, I just don't look back at it that harshly. And I can see what Rodgers is doing. He had a lot of criticism at first that he's trying to tinker with things, but what manager comes into a side and doesn't try to make it in their own image? They don't come into a side and think, I'm just going to copy Ange Postecoglou's tactics. And over time, we've seen that Brendan Rodgers puts his own spin on things.
Yeah, absolutely. Who would be on your list to move on in January? I've got 3 written down. I think we'll probably be agreement on them. James McCarthy, Ben Seagrest, and Mikey Johnson.
Yeah, definitely. I'm trying to think of anybody else.
Maybe Kobayashi.
Kobayashi, definitely. I'm looking at the rest of the team.
Nat Phillips.
Nat Phillips will definitely go. I don't think he'll stay.
I think
but I think with a lot of other players who aren't really up to the standard, there's like a sentimentality with them. Like Joe Hart, he won't leave in January, but there's still a lot of uncertainty over Joe Hart's contract situation.
Yeah.
He's not agreed a new deal, and his contract's up next summer. So a player like him, you might see leave, and not in January, but as you're saying, there is a lot of players who's costing Celtic a lot of money on the wage bill when you look at them. And McCarthy, that's got to be one of the most baffling deals ever. Like you could make the comparison with how bad Shane Duffy was at Celtic, but at least he played. James McCarthy joined Celtic on a long-term deal. I say it wasn't a 2-year
It was
deal.
4.5, was it not? Nah, maybe not. Maybe 4.
It was quite a long-term deal. With his injury record, you've got to look at that and think Celtic's recruitment department must have been in a bad time there between managers, and they've signed him.
I remember an ex-pro coming on one of our shows just after McCarthy signed, and he said exactly what I think went on there. Celtic, that was very early in the Ange process where there was a lot of chat about, do you know what I mean? I think it was before, I think he came in before like Kyogo and things like that. Agents were using that as a massive opportunity to get their players big contracts, and Celtic had money to go about. They'd lost it, obviously. They lost a lot of players that summer. I think they were always desperate to get that experienced body in next to McGregor. So I think do you know what I mean? I think that's been a bit of a con pulled off by the McCarthy camp, to be honest.
I know he's a Celtic fan. He's supported Celtic his whole life. Probably an incredible experience from it, be at Celtic, but it's no helping anybody him not playing any games as a professional football player and not even making squads. That's frustrating for everybody to see.
I actually can't think of the last time I can remember seeing him play. Like honestly, I don't.
I think the last time I remember seeing him play was when Yakimakis scored a last-minute winner against St Johnstone away from home. I think he put the ball to Bernabei, and then Bernabei put the ball in the box. That's the last memory I have of it, and that was away last season.
Yeah, I'm just looking here. He played 22 games his first season. I would have believed that.
Mm-hmm.
7 of them were obviously in the must have been Europe.
It's always the bench as well, isn't it?
I'm astonished by that. I didn't think he played as much as that, but he's not been a player that's featured at all for me, and I don't. I'll be very surprised if he kicks another ball for Celtic. Couple of fun ones here. What would your ultimate Celtic 5-a-side team be?
I'll think a couple of players first. I'll go with Larsson, definitely up front.
I've got Larsson in there. I've written this down.
Do you think I should go with 2 up front? Larsson
well, I've went for a goalkeeper, a defender, 2 midfielders, and a striker.
Mm-hmm.
I've went for Foster in goal.
Yeah, I'd go with Foster in goal as well, especially over the past 20 years. He's been the best Celtic goalkeeper. Jimmy Johnston's got to be in there, surely.
Yeah, well, you could have Johnson in there. I've kind of went for
Billy McNeil in defence.
Yeah, you could put Billy McNeil in there. I've went for players that I can remember seeing. So whether you want to do it that way or not, but I've went with Foster, Van Dijk. I would always put Petrov in my Celtic team. Petrov was
Moravcik as well. You've got
Moravcik's in there. Moravcik's in there.
McStay. There is some older ones there. I've only seen highlights of. Never seen them in the flesh. But
it's a tough one. But send your 5-a-side teams in below. I think that's quite a fascinating subject. Final question: if you could interview any figure from Celtic's history, who would it be?
Jock Stein.
I've got Fergus McCann. I think that'd be the most fascinating interview you can get.
Did you see that documentary that came out this season about him? I thought that was very interesting. I learned a lot from watching that because I didn't realise that how close Celtic were to moving to Campus Lang. I don't think a lot of people knew that before watching that. That's incredible to think about. Closer Celtic's history, and even looking at the stadium, it doesn't even look like the same stadium that we see today. Celtic fans have been so blessed in the past 20 years just because of what Fergus McCann was willing to do for the club.
I would put it on record that I think Fergus McCann should either a stand or some. I think he should get. He's that important to Celtic's history.
A lot of people would agree with that.
I think he should be. His legacy should be involved because if that stadium, the reason that stadium is as good as it is because of him.
But when you look at teams like Tottenham, they've built a stadium in the past couple of years, and it's a similar size. They built that away back, what was it, 10, 15, 20 years ago? They built that stadium, and it's just, and every season it gives Celtic a financial advantage over the rest of Scotland. They have more season ticket holders. They're able to get more people in the stadium, buy food, buy drink, buy clothes. It gives Celtic an advantage over the rest of Scotland.
So will always fascinate me about Fergus McCann's time at Celtic. It wasn't the most universally popular when he was there. But it was
I think that documentary covers that greatly, doesn't it?
It's like when Celtic won the league and the flag was being unfurled, and there's fans booing him. But now when you look back, it's that is the brilliant thing of hindsight is you look back at that time and thinking, why on earth is he getting booed? But at the time, he was, I mean, there's articles in the Sun comparing him to Saddam Hussein. But things like that are just like, do you know what I mean? It was because he was unlike anything we'd seen in Scottish football before. And I think that's a cultural thing. But I think he just was so much different. He was such a, his ideas, like his philosophy in terms of like being an American kind of style businessman, was something Scottish football's probably never seen before and not seen since. Like, it was that unique.
Football fans just see it that way, that when somebody can go into run a football club, they expect success in maybe 1 or 2 years. But it's so much more longer term than even a manager. I know managers don't get much time, but somebody's going to run a football club, you've got to give them maybe even 10, 15 years to be reasonable, really. Yeah. And he was working on all aspects of Celtic, and he was able to sell them in a position of strength to Dermot Desmond, and obviously he was able to invest more money. And I think that documentary just covered how close Celtic were to going under, and if it wasn't for somebody like Fergus McCann, they wouldn't have been in the situation where they are today. And the one thing I would just like to say is I'd like to see Celtic progress further, because it's always good to look back and see where you've progressed from, but you want to constantly see your football team progressing as a club further.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think Fergus McCann should be commended for eternity just for what he did for Celtic. But before we wrap up, obviously there's a lot of games coming up between now and Christmas. Like, there's 2 big European games, Motherwell on Saturday. There's obviously trips to St Johnstone, trips to Kilmarnock, trips to Dundee before the Rangers game. There's a lot of games coming up, and it's vital that Celtic have as fit a squad as you can get, because injuries are obviously creeping up. We don't know if Kyogo is going to be fully fit.
Is it not usually a week or 2 weweeks to say for a head injury? It can be quite complicated.
Yeah, but obviously, like, Maeda been injured as well. It's a huge few weeks, and it's going to be massive.
But Rodgers, as I said earlier in the season, he had to manage an injury crisis. Of all the managers, I'd back him the most to manage Celtic through this period. He's done it before. Yeah. He just has that air of confidence. I think he kind of lost that for a wee bit of the season before, and then he just rocked up to Ibrox and was able to get that 1-0 victory. And I don't think anybody's seen it coming but him. And he backs himself, and he knows what he can do with this squad of players. And he's bringing that aura back. We didn't see too much of that at the beginning of the season. He went about his business quite quietly, but he's beginning to start kicking on, and I think the rest of Scotland should be worried.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think it's obviously going to be a fascinating period. But that was a lot of fun to get some questions in. We'll do these kind of every point during the international break and winter break and things like that. But it's been a pleasure, Michael. Thank you very much for coming on. It's always a good thing to be on. Pleasure. Thanks very much for tuning in to this episode. And if you want to follow us, then follow our social media and subscribe to our YouTube and podcast channels. Cheers.